Hi there, Elizabeth Hines from OurPaleoFamily.com, and I'm back with a take 2 of my Instant Pot roast. I don't know what happened, but this particular video has gotten lots and lots of views, and of course I'm thrilled about that, except for one thing. Well, maybe a couple things. It was one of the very first things I made in my Instant Pot, so I was still kind of getting used to it. And secondly, I guess I had like the world's toughest cut of meat on that particular day, because I cooked it, I think, for a total of over an hour, something like 70 or 80 minutes, and it still even wasn't super tender like a roast should be. And you know, one person commented that maybe I overcooked it and like it got tender and then tough again, which I guess that's possible. I have never heard of that before, and I've never experienced that before. But I don't know everything, so I guess that's a possibility. And then other people said, you know, gosh, that's just taking a really long time, but it really wasn't tender, and I wanted it to be tender. We weren't going to eat a tough piece of meat. So I'm starting over. I thought maybe there was some sort of user error, or maybe it was the meat. So I'm going to make the same thing again. And I'm starting with, what I have today is a chuck blade boneless roast. And I looked in the Instant Pot instructions, and they list the different cuts of meat and how long they recommend you cook them. And they listed a chuck and a blade as two separate cuts, but mine's a chuck blade, so I got 2 for 1, I guess, at Whole Foods. And this is a little over 2 pounds, about 2 1/4 pounds, and it's a decent amount of fat marbling in there. And I'm going to treat it just like I did the last time, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is get my pot on saute, high saute, so that it will, I just stuck my elbow on my meat, so I can brown my meat on all sides. And you could use ghee, you could use grass-fed butter. I'm using some bacon fat from my really good quality bacon that I reserved because I like that flavor. If it adds a little bacony flavor, that's fantastic. And I'm going to get some fresh cracked black pepper and some good quality mineral salt all over my meat. I'm going to use my tongs and keep the hands a little bit clean. Flip it over and pepper this side, and I'll salt both sides. If I measured this, it's probably about 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. This is a 1/4 teaspoon measure. So I'm going to put about 1/2 teaspoon of salt on. Rub that all over. Really rub that in nicely. Sort of pick up all the salt and pepper that fell on the paper. Make sure my fat's melted. And I'm going to put my meat in, and I'm going to not touch it for about 5 minutes, and it should sizzle. When it releases easily, then it should be nice and caramelized on that side, and I'll flip it over. It should take 5 to 6 minutes on each side. I want to move it around a little bit and see if it is released from the bottom or if it's stuck. I just can't grab it. Brown on that side. Okay, while that is browning on the second side, I'm going to slice my onion. That's what's going to go in next. This is just one medium-sized Vidalia onion, because it's Vidalia season, so it should be a little sweeter, which is nice. keep a trash can beside me when I'm cooking, so it's just real convenient to throw away all my mess. Have you made this yet? Do you have an Instant Pot? What are you making in your Instant Pot? I would love to know. Leave some comments. I've seen several people in different places have said they got a sort of a lemon for their Instant Pot and had to send it back because it was not working properly. So far, so good with mine. It's working great. Okay, so just cut those into little half circles, because when I do a pot roast, I like them in bigger pieces, because they'll cook for a long time. They'll be real soft. Okay, let's see how he looks on the back side. Nice and brown. Can you see that? Just what we want. So I'm going to take them out, put in my onions. There's still oil in there from my bacon fat that I put in. There's plenty of fat in the meat that's going to render out, but it didn't have time to render out in here just yet. Just going to stir this around. Oh, it smells so good. Bacon and onions, I think, is some of the best scents. Love the way that smells. Makes me think of Thanksgiving for some reason. Cooking the vegetables to make dressing, We'll let that sit right there. All these veggies are going to go in after we cook our meat for a half an hour or so. We've got some onions, these are potatoes, some baby bella, mushrooms, some carrots. Somebody in my house, I buy these for snacking, I buy these big ones for cooking, and somebody likes to eat the big ones. I think they think it's fun to use the peeler. So I had a whole bag that was going to go in here. So I just have a couple left, so I'll throw in a bunch of baby carrots, which that will be perfectly fine. But once our onions are done, I'm going to put in all of these other ingredients that are going to add a lot of flavor. I have 2 cloves of garlic, some tomato paste, red wine vinegar, and fish sauce. If you don't care about being strictly paleo, or you don't have fish sauce, but you do have Worcestershire sauce, you can use that instead. Use about a tablespoon of the Worcestershire, and I'm only going to use about a teaspoon of the fish sauce because it's really potent. And a tablespoon of the red wine vinegar, a tablespoon of tomato paste. I might up that to 2 tablespoons. I'll see how it looks when I put it in. But I have my spoons out, so I'm actually going to measure so I can write this up properly for you. I'm going to give my onions a stir. Got a lot of good caramelization on the bottom of my pan, which is excellent. That's just what I want. Okay, let's check our onions again. Okay, let me just show you. They're nice and soft. They have a little bit of color on them. I've got some good fond. There's that brown stuff on the bottom of my pan. That looks perfect. So I'm going to move on with the rest of my ingredients. I'm going to put in a tablespoon of tomato paste first, because just like all vegetables that have natural sugar in them, tomato paste is tomatoes, and so it has some natural sugar. And if you let it actually cook down in your pan for a minute, it will caramelize, and that will add some good flavor. Came right out. How nice. Okay, so I stirred around my tomato paste. That'll have a chance to brown while I get my other ingredients ready. We have piano recital tonight. Not in my house, but with my family. And so everybody's having to get clean and get dressed nicely. Okay, teaspoon of fish sauce. Potent stuff. Tablespoon of red wine vinegar. Woo! Or a little more. That's okay. It won't hurt anything. Let me write that down and make sure I say I did about a tablespoon and a half of that. And a teaspoon of fish sauce. And I'm going to use, because I want my garlic to be really small, I'm going to use this garlic press. And if I were just going to chop it up, I would probably use 1, but you lose a bit using these press machines, so I'm going to actually do 2 cloves. Using all my muscles. Whew. I guess that's good for working on your hand strength. Okay, I'm going to give all that a little stir. Browning so nicely, I'm going to turn it off. And the last thing I'm going to add right now is 2 cups of chicken broth. If you had beef broth, you could use beef broth. If it's homemade, I think the beef broth that you can buy doesn't taste particularly great. So I didn't have any homemade beef broth, so I'm just using 2 cups of my homemade chicken broth. And there was, you probably saw some stuff floating in there. It was just the fat because it was frozen. And I scraped a little bit of the fat. The fat will all rise to the top. So if you want to have a very low fat dish, you can scrape all that off. And I scraped a little bit off, but I don't care about it being low fat. Obviously, I'm cooking a roast, which is not the leanest cut of meat. So I just put that in there. Okay, so the meat goes back in. Get him buried in there. Just a little bit of accumulated juices, not much, but we'll put that in. And I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so on goes my lid. I'm going for 35 minutes. The instruction book said 35 to 40. So I'm going to start with 35. Lock it into place. Turn my valve to sealing. And it's on manual. It's on high pressure. So I just press the plus till I get up to 35 minutes. I'm going to let it go. Whoops. And when that comes out, we'll have these veggies cut into bite-sized pieces and ready to go in the pan. Okay, my 35 minutes is up. We're in a hurry, so I'm going to quick release the rest of the steam, the pressure. That'll take a couple minutes. Okay, so my pressure is released. I'm going to take this off. I'm going to pull my meat out. I've turned my oven on to broil, and what I'm going to do is put my meat on this tray. Okay, I'm going to get my veggies in there right away without having them splash. So I have my potatoes. I have a few more potatoes than I would normally do, but I had that bag of potatoes for a while and I was afraid they were about to go bad, so I went ahead and cooked the rest of them. But before I fill that up, I do want to taste my broth and see if it needs some salt and pepper. It does need some salt and pepper. Remember, I had about a half a teaspoon of salt and a quarter of a teaspoon of pepper on my meat. So that was just for my meat. And that wasn't enough to season all the sauce and all these veggies. So let me get those in. Just give that a gentle stir. I've got mushrooms, carrots, potatoes, and my onions, of course, I cooked in there for a very long time. Okay, so I'm going to turn that back on. Seal. I have to actually turn it off and then turn it back on. And I just want 6 minutes. It should be enough to get those veggies nice and tender. Here we go. And I'm going to not really shred my meat, but kind of pull it apart into chunks. You know what? It's okay. It could have gone, see, I did 35 minutes. My instruction book said 35 to 40. And honestly, we're running out of time. We've got to scoot to piano recital. So 35 minutes was all the time I had. I think 40 would have been good for it. I'm going to taste a little piece here and just make sure it tastes okay. Let that cool for a second. So I'm kind of breaking it apart into chunks. See, why can't I pull that apart? It should really come apart easily. Let me switch it up. Ooh, cut that out. I'm going to cut it across like this to make those fibers a little bit shorter. I said in my first video that this recipe is based on the one by the Domestic Man, and this is the same. I mean, it's basically the same recipe. I've tweaked just a couple little things, but not very much. Not enough to not give him the credit. It does taste tender, so whew. Good. I think it needs a little salt. He says to broil it to get a little bit crispy, so I'm going to do what he says and pop this under the broiler. Okay, so I put my meat under the broiler for about 10 minutes and it rendered some of the fat out. It got it a little crispy on top, and that's beautiful. And I'm going to put it in this dish because we are going out to our piano recital, and so we're going to eat this when we get home. So I'm going to put everything in this dish and then we'll just heat it up. And I'm going to use my tray for my veggies. So my veggies have cooked. I did the quick release on the pressure. And whoo, let me get this out of the way. And I'm going to take the vegetables out and put them on the tray. Same thing with the meat. My broiler is still on high. And I'm going to broil them for about 5 minutes. You know what, while I'm spooning those out, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back onto saute, because what that's going to do is turn the little burner on under there and let my broth / gravy start reducing, which is what I want it to do, because it's pretty loose right now, like a broth, and I want a thick gravy consistency. Spread those out. Oh yeah, 6 minutes was perfect. Everything's done just perfectly. Tender, but not much. Okay, I'm going to taste my broth again. It's really bubbling away. I'll let this sit so I don't burn my tongue. So you have a couple choices for thickening. You can make a slurry with some arrowroot or cassava flour. So you would take a little bit of cold water, about 2 tablespoons of cold water in a measuring cup or a little bowl, and then add a couple teaspoons of your starch. You can use tapioca starch, arrowroot starch, cassava flour, and swirl that up and then add that to your boiling broth. I'm using, because we're trying to go a little lower carb in this house right now, I'm adding what's called Glucomannan, which is a fiber. People take this as a fiber supplement, but it's a great thickener for sauces and gravies, and it really is powerful stuff. It doesn't add any flavor, doesn't give it a weird texture. So I put in, no matter what I'm making, I add just 1/4 teaspoon at a time, because I don't want it to end up too thick. So I'm up to 3/4 of a teaspoon now. I can tell it's thickening. It's a nice rich red color. I'm going to give that a taste, which will let me test its seasoning as well as its thickness. I can already tell it's a lot thicker than it was, but I think I want it a little bit thicker. I might put in another 1/4 teaspoon, which would be a total of 1 teaspoon. It does taste really, really good. It's nice and rich. In the Domestic Man's recipe, he used wine, and I'm not cooking with wine because 1, I don't have any in the house, and 2, I'm doing a Whole 30 right now, which means no wine. So that's why I use the vinegar instead. But if you did use a nice red wine, that would it would add a little bit of a different flavor. It would be kind of add a richness, I think. So certainly, if you like wine and you have some, and it's something you can drink, then by all means, instead of the vinegar, add the red wine. That would be delicious. Okay, so I added 1 teaspoon of my Glucomannan, so I'm going to write that down so I can write up my recipe. And that gravy is really perfect. Let me grab my veggies out of the oven. I'll show you what they look like after they've been under the broiler. See how they're nice and browned on top? I'm going to give those a little toss so we can brown them on all sides, and we'll be ready to go. Okay, so Instant Pot roast, take 2. We had a chuck blade roast, about 2 1/4 pounds. I high pressure in my Instant Pot, cooked that for 35 minutes. It could have gone 40, that would have not overdone it, but it certainly didn't need 70 minutes like the last one. So that was some freakishly tough piece of meat, apparently. So we followed the instructions in the Instant Pot instruction manual, which I have found to be very accurate. Sometimes I'm kind of shocked, like for green beans, for instance, it might say 2 minutes. Like, really, under pressure for 2 minutes, but really it's enough. Of course, some of it is to taste. Maybe you like your green beans really, really, really super tender, and maybe you like them sort of crisp tender. So there is a little bit of experimenting involved. But something like meat, it's either done or it's not done. And in 35 minutes, my roast was done to our liking. It was tender enough. My sauce is reducing and thickening, and I've got my veggies under the broiler, and we're going to have a perfect pot roast in just a little while. And the recipe you can find on ourpaleofamily.com. Thank you.